I wish everyone a very good evening, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Jim Ken. I'm the current president of the Winchester Seniors Association, and we're very happy to see all of you here this evening. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Winchester Seniors Association and the Council on Aging, Winchester Council on Aging, we want to wish you a very warm welcome. This is our 5th annual Brennan Lecture, and that is co-sponsored by the Winchester Seniors Association and the Winchester COA. And the two people that are most responsible for keeping things organized and actually organizing this whole event are Ann Smith, the administrator for the Winchester Seniors Association, and Ruth Young. And Ann and Ruth, would you stand up, please? And at the same time, I'd like to acknowledge Marcia Wood, who is the chairman of the COA Board of Directors. Marcia, I know you. Yeah, thank you. As you know, this lecture series is named after Mary Brennan, and Frank and Mary Brennan's son, Jack, who grew up in Winchester, went to school here, and who was currently the CEO of Vanguard Investments, Vanguard Mutual Funds, gave our first talk, and as a result of that, helped establish this whole lecture series. And Frank is here tonight, along with Mary Ann. Frank, could you wave? Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this. And as we all know, Winchester is a wonderful and unique town, and we are very fortunate that there are many residents who are known worldwide. And tonight, we're privileged to have as our guest speaker Dr. John Pastore. Dr. Pastore is a resident of Winchester. He is currently the director of electrocardiography at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center and an associate professor of medicine at Tufts Medical School. He has served in the United States as a research internist at the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, investigating the long-term medical effects on survivors of the bomb. His disarmament and humanitarian efforts took him on 2 occasions to North Korea, and he's also visited Iraq. Dr. Pastore was Executive Secretary for the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and he is currently the President of the Physicians for Social Responsibility. This organization has as its focus world security, environmental health, and violence prevention. Dr. Pastore's father was chairman of the Joint Congressional Committee on Atomic Energy for much of his Senate career. So both Senator Pastore and Dr. Pastore have spoken on many occasions on the need to abolish nuclear weapons. As you see, the title of Dr. Pastore's talk this evening is Citizen Diplomacy in the Search for Peace. So please help me welcome Dr. John Pastore.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Mr. Brennan, it's a pleasure to give this lecture in Mary Brennan's name. I put together a slightly different talk this time than I thought I might, and I focused on one country that is a problem country right now for the United States and for the world. And I hope that what I have to say is of interest to you, and that perhaps we share some things that most Americans don't get to see too much of. So in that spirit, I think we'll get started. I've entitled this, subtitled at least, Medical Outreach to North Korea, a Work in Progress. And I've called it a work in progress because it would be presumptuous to call it anything else. There's no question that any outreach to countries like North Korea and Iraq is fledgling at this point, and any attempt to bring these countries into the world community is fraught with difficulty, and I'll explore some of those difficulties and challenges, but that's what also makes it gratifying for all of us to think about and to try to do something about. The two organizations that I'm affiliated with are the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which is an international federation of about 62 countries' physicians, representing about 250,000 doctors throughout the world, including some in North Korea. And we had an affiliate in Iraq before the first Iraq War. We no longer have one there. And we can talk about that perhaps in the question and answer period. And Physicians for Social Responsibility, which is the United States affiliate of IPPNW. It's that organization of which I'm the president-elect and will be the president in January of 2005. Physicians for Social Responsibility comprises about 35,000 members in the United States, only 25% of whom are actually physicians. The rest are people who are interested in the work that we're doing and who want to be part of that. If you're going to read one book about the Koreas, especially North Korea, I think this is a great book to read. Dan Oberdorfer is not so much a scholar as a reporter, and perhaps for that reason the book is extremely readable and very factual, written in a reportorial style that I found to be very clear. And it taught me a lot more about North Korea than I could have hoped to know before going there from any other single source. So I highly recommend this book. Just a brief history of the Koreas. The Korean Peninsula is in a very strategic location, unfortunately for itself. It's been disputed over the ages because of its strategic position, and it's been an important battleground for China, Russia, the Philippines, various other countries in the Pacific Rim for many, many years. In the year 1905, there was a fierce battle, or war actually, fought between Russia and Japan over the Korean Peninsula. And as a matter of fact, one proposition at that point was to divide the Korean Peninsula at the 38th parallel, which essentially bisects Korea right down the middle. And this plan was actually rejected by the Japanese, and at that time it was felt that the Japanese were being very presumptuous and foolish, because it wasn't felt that that they could defeat the Russian army at that time. Russia was going through the throes of several revolutions that led up to the final capitulation of the Tsarist regime in 1917. But as a result of that, perhaps, the Japanese essentially won the war, and they wound up occupying the entire Korean Peninsula from about 1905 until the end of the Second World War in 1945. So they had sole ownership of it, and by all accounts, very brutal ownership of it. The brutality is remembered today by Korean citizens and is openly talked about. At the end of the Second World War, with Russia and the United States being the victorious powers over Japan, a decision had to be made about what to do about this strategic peninsula. Unbeknownst to the United States, the history of the Russians simply wanting to cut the peninsula in half and take the northern part for themselves, the United States said, well, you know, there's this 38th parallel right in the middle, so why don't we not fight over this? Why don't we take the south and why don't you take the north? And that's basically what was done. So Russia in 1945 got what it was looking for in 1905. It got the north. And that situation created basically a division not only of the peninsula but between families, so that there are many families who were caught on opposite sides of this dividing line, now known as the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone. I'll get into the DMZ a little bit later, but just that brief history to indicate how the country wound up getting bisected the way it is right here. With the increasing brutality and Stalinist regime in the north, the polarity between the north and the south grew from 1945 until 1950, and of course that resulted in the Korean War. Also something that's very fresh in the mind of all Koreans on both sides of this parallel. The Korean War never really ended, as you probably know. There was an armistice and there was an agreement signed, but the war was never declared at an end. And that's been a point of dispute for all the decades since that point, since that time, that the war never officially ended. The Koreans, again, talk about that all the time. At first, because most of the natural resources, the waterfalls, the hydroelectric plants, and all that sort of thing were in North Korea, the gross domestic product of the North for the first several years after 1945 actually exceeded that of the South. But probably because of the very restrictive socialist regime in the North, within 5 years or so, the South began to overtake the North in terms of its economic strength. And now South Korea is one of the top 10 economic powers in the world, whereas North Korea is really exceeded only by certain sub-Saharan African countries in terms of its poverty. The so-called liberator, or the fellow in charge of North Korea at the time of World War II and also during the Korean War, was Kim Il-sung, who is called the Great Leader. He's almost never referred to by his actual name, but he's always referred to as the Great Leader. And he is revered, and beyond reverence, he's actually very much loved by the people there. There's an entire cult of almost worship of him that pervades the entire educational system. Goes way beyond how our children are taught about George Washington. It's closer to a deity, basically, the way they revere him. He passed away relatively few years ago, and his son, Kim Jong-il, who was called the Dear Leader, took over. But he has never assumed the title of president of the country out of deference to his father, the Great Leader. He's simply the head of the Communist Party in North Korea, but not the actual president. But there's no question who's in charge. There are many stories about him, about his personal idiosyncrasies and all that sort of thing, but we can go into that perhaps a little bit later. It's not the main thrust of my talk. But that is Kim Jong-il, the so-called Dear Leader. There's one other historical figure that needs to be mentioned, and that's Kim Dae-jung, who until fairly recently was the president of South Korea, and he's the author of what's called the Sunshine Policy, which was an attempt to create a rapprochement between the North and the South, beginning several years ago and just ending basically when he got caught up in a government scandal a few years ago and essentially was deposed. But in the year 2000, he created quite a stir by actually traveling to Pyongyang and meeting with Kim Jong-il, embracing and having several days of very useful talks that led to several exchanges of family members traveling across the DMZ to visit with relatives. And there was great hope at that point, this is about 4 years ago, that this was going to lead to a general thaw in relations between the North and the South. The people in the North don't really talk about the South as being the enemy. As a matter of fact, they look upon them as being brothers, brethren, sisters, and they always refer to them in those terms. They look upon the United States as being the real enemy because it's got 35,000 troops in South Korea and it stages military games close to the DMZ. But the propaganda basically in the North is that the South Koreans want to unify with the North, and it's the United States that's keeping them from doing so. In spite of all of that, the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, during the Clinton administration, traveled to Pyongyang, and although we don't have any diplomatic relations with North Korea, she had several days of talks with Kim Jong-il, who she pronounced to be someone, almost in the words of Margaret Thatcher, that she could do business with. And so that looked like a promising eventuality as well. This is the face that North Korea would like us basically to see of them, with athletes. These are skaters performing in an international competition. And this is a women's soccer team also performing in an international competition. Unfortunately, there is another side to the public policy in North Korea, and that has to do a lot with the militaristic propaganda against the United States. And the degree to which this is pushed depends an awful lot on how things are going between Washington and Pyongyang, what the kind of rhetoric is and what the level of insult is going back and forth. And Sometimes these posters are up and sometimes they're down, but this is what a typical anti-U.S. poster would look like. There have been a lot of concerns, obviously, about the nuclear capability of North Korea, and it's assumed that they have or could have a few nuclear weapons right now. It's less than 6, but it's assumed that they could have 6 nuclear weapons over the next couple of years. A nuclear weapon doesn't do them an awful lot of good unless they can deliver it through a ballistic missile. And I'll show you in a minute what the range of their current ballistic missiles are. But this is the factory at Yongbyon, which is the nuclear facility. The United States and North Korea almost went to war in 1994 because the North Koreans had done something with their fuel rods that worried very much the international atomic energy folks, and specifically those in the United States. And it was felt that they were well on the way to launching a nuclear weapons program at that point. Jimmy Carter, among others, but Jimmy Carter specifically, traveled to Pyongyang and helped broker an agreement whereby we basically gave the North Koreans $4 billion to develop, with a promise to develop a light water reactor for domestic energy uses in exchange for their dismantling the nuclear weapons capability and promising not to build nuclear weapons. Both sides basically reneged on parts of that agreement. It's now clear that the North Koreans did not fully dismantle their nuclear weapons program, and especially with changes of administration and so forth, we also didn't go very far in terms of developing their atomic energy for peaceful purposes. I mentioned before the range of their missiles. This Taepodong missile has a range of about 6,000 kilometers, and this is the one that they shot basically over the Sea of Japan and flew over Japan, which basically ruined and set back by years their relationship with Japan, which had been thriving under the South Korean regime of Kim Dae-jung. That seems to have died down a little bit, but there's still a tremendous amount of antipathy between Japan and North Korea that was caused by the demonstration shot of a ballistic missile very close to the Japanese peninsula. The main thing that I really want to talk about is not the military or political side of this, but more the human side of it, because happening at the same time as these political developments, namely in the 1990s, there occurred a series of floods and droughts, natural disasters in North Korea that resulted basically in a famine. The extent of the famine was very difficult to gauge through the international community because of the extreme secrecy of the North Korean government. They were not forthcoming at all. At first they denied there was any real problem, pretty much the way the Chinese denied that they had a problem with AIDS. But it soon became apparent with leakage of information to the outside that they had a major problem on their hands with famine because of the disruption of the rice crop, specifically with alternating floods and droughts. It was almost a biblical kind of cycle of locusts, like in the story of the Pharaoh. So that in the last 12 years, North Korea may have lost up to 3 million of its 23 million citizens to famine, which is just a staggering percentage. And of course, as usually happens in disasters of this nature, it's the most vulnerable people, the sick, the very elderly and sick, and the children who bear the brunt of this sort of thing. The causes of this disaster included the natural disasters of floods and droughts that I mentioned, the loss of support from the former Soviet bloc. The Soviet Union disappeared at about this same time, as you also know, and it no longer became in the best interests of any of the Eastern European countries or even Russia to do much to support North Korea. Their eyes were turned more to the West, where they had major trade agreements. And as a matter of fact, China publicly told North Korea not to depend on it if it got into a military problem with South Korea. And the reason for that was that China had very lucrative trade agreements with South Korea. So a replay of the MacArthur-Truman situation in the early 50s was not about to happen, and North Korea was pretty much left out to swing by itself. And then the third thing was the restrictive secrecy of the Pyongyang government, which obviously resulted in a very slow arrival of international aid, both food and medicines, from the West because of the the lack of information coming out of the country, and also because the North Koreans were not very helpful or cooperative when aid workers went in. They would frequently demand that the aid be given by themselves, that is by the North Korean politicians and bureaucrats, rather than by the aid workers. And several organizations that distribute food internationally have actually left North Korea because they couldn't put up with the restrictive policies of the government in terms of distribution. The people who obviously get crushed in this are the people who have no voice at all. They're the citizens and the people who have no political power at all. So the result of this was children with breathtaking degrees of famine. And the interesting thing about the famine, if one travels to North Korea, is that it's not similar to places like China or India, where people who are desperately poor and dying on the streets are visible to the people. One doesn't see this by going to North Korea. And even as physicians, we had to work very hard to even be shown people who were in trouble from a medical standpoint or from a malnutrition standpoint. The reasons for that one can only speculate on. The bad explanation would be, or the one unflattering to the North Koreans would be, that they can't own up to the fact that the system has failed, and therefore they don't want the West to know about it. The other thing, and part of that's true, the other thing that's partially true as well is that they're an extremely proud people. They don't like to appear to be begging. They feel self-sufficient, and I'll get into the self-sufficiency theory of the North Korean leadership. And these things all come together, and again, whether it's politics or pride or whatever, the people who get hurt are kids like this. It's been described as a very unusual famine, a slow famine without bodies in the street, but with children picking through cow dung for undigested bits of grain. There are stories of people going into the forest to eat bark off the trees and eating straw for any kind of nutrition they could get. Not only are the bodies wasted, but there's been such a deprivation of vitamins that the brains are not developing well. So you have an unusual preponderance of mental retardation and retarded neurologic growth as well. There's also been a famine of the mind in terms of adults. There is virtually no information from the outside world available to the average citizen of North Korea. The only news sources are state-run. It's the only place I've ever been where there are absolutely no billboards. There's no outdoor advertising. As you look out a hotel window, you say, there's something very strange here. And the thing that's strange is there are no signs. North Korea is the only nation on earth that is not connected to the internet. That includes sub-Saharan Africa. Medically, virtually all sources of information from outside the country have dried up. They used to help train Russian and Eastern Bloc physicians, for instance, and they were known for their expertise in medicine. They had a very good system of healthcare and medical education, but being shut off from the outside, we were talking earlier about when I made my trips there, digital photography was not in full swing. Imagine what it's like to learn in a university or a medical school or an engineering school right now if you can't get on the internet. I mean, how do you do that? What happens is that they just stop knowing things. They're so far behind intellectually that it's going to take them a long time to catch up. Well, there are several ways to look at a situation like this. It's pretty easy to throw one's hands up over it, and there's been a movement among some in this country to simply wait for the North Koreans to die on the vine politically, and to say, look, given time, which is probably true, this kind of regime cannot last. The problem with that, of course, is that we don't know how long that would take, and we don't know how many more people are going to die as a result of the persistence of this kind of regime. So the attitude that we took in IPPNW was to see what we could do to, number one, avert a nuclear war through miscalculation. Let's make sure that they know over there what the results would be of getting into a nuclear war. It's astounding how the leaders of some countries who have nuclear weapons programs are very blithe about the effects, the medical effects of nuclear war. They think that, bone marrow transplants are going to handle everything. That from a leader of India fairly recently. So one of the reasons that we wanted to get involved with this was that we wanted to be sure that they understood what we knew about the effects of nuclear weapons medically. The second thing was that there's obviously a humanitarian imperative here. If you've got children dying by the droves, it's very difficult to stand by and watch that happen. So what we started to do was to organize a trip to North Korea. The first trip took place in late 1998. And at that time, during the first trip, we had a fair amount of success working with major pharmaceutical companies and big companies like CVS that's based in Rhode Island, where I'm from. And we received some fairly major donations of expensive vitamins, antibiotics, and antihypertensive, that sort of thing. For the second trip, which occurred about a year and a half later, that source had pretty much dried up. Companies had changed their policies. They were focusing more on domestic charities, not international charities. People were a little bit less patient with North Korea because of the way they'd handle the famine and the food distribution. So we wound up simply buying things. And so we'd go into a place like CVS or BJ's and just buy vitamins and prenatal vitamins especially, that kind of thing that's unheard of there. And for several hundred or a few $1,000s, one could get something that was almost unheard of in major hospitals in North Korea. Dr. Frank Chung is a Korean American who's one of the leaders in pathology at my institution, St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. And as I'll show you later, if one does this kind of medical relief to North Korea, it's not necessarily frowned upon by the U.S. government, but there are very strict rules for doing it. And one of the rules is that if you're going to spend more than or give away more than $400 worth of anything in North Korea, you have to get an export license. You have to become an exporter. And it takes about 6 months to get the license from the Treasury Department, which I did. I went through the process and became an official exporter to North Korea and have the certificate, which was good for 2 years to prove that. As part of that deal, you also had to promise to translate all of the directions, all of the instructions for the medication into Korean. And not being at all fluent in Korean myself, I started looking for some Korean physicians, and Frank was there. Richard Moon, Dick Moon, who's one of our great cardiac surgeons at our place, is also Korean. And so they, and especially Frank, did all the translating, every single bottle, the directions, the dosage, everything. I'm very much indebted to them for doing this. The amazing thing to me was these folks are from South Korea. I mean, their families are in South Korea. And what amazed me, I was a little sweaty palmed when I went to go see Frank. I didn't know how he was going to deal with the fact that I was going to bring this stuff to North Korea. But he said, absolutely. He said, it's terrible what's happening over there. What can I do for you? And spent hours doing it. So we packed all this stuff up in boxes and headed off to Logan Airport with the medications for North Korea. Northwest Airlines, and this is not an infomercial, but Northwest Airlines gave me free, we brought hundreds of pounds of stuff that I never had to pay for in terms of excess baggage. So thanks to Northwest Airlines as well. A couple of things that are of interest about getting into North Korea. There are no diplomatic relations with the United States. As I mentioned, the State Department advises contacting the Swedish embassy for any problems. I called the State Department and I said, I'm not sure exactly what happens if I get sick or something like that. And they said, well, you can't, there's no consulate, there's no U.S. presence there. But we have good relations with the Swedes and they always take care of our people if they're caught over there. One hopes that's still the same after what's been going on in Iraq, but at any rate, I never had to call the Swedes. In order to get into North Korea, there's no direct flights, obviously, so you have to travel through Beijing. And there's only one flight from Beijing to Pyongyang a week. It takes off on Tuesdays, and there's one flight back on Saturdays, so you need a good alarm clock, especially coming back. You don't want to be stuck there too long. I mentioned this restriction, only $400. There's a restriction placed by the U.S. government on bringing even humanitarian aid, such as medications, without an export license from the Treasury Department. And the DPRK, as it's officially known, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, accepts or even welcomes U.S. dollars, but has no U.S. credit card contracts. And therefore, you have to bring cash or traveler's checks. This infuriated me briefly when I was at the hotel checking in, because all of my colleagues, I was the only American on the trip, all of my colleagues who were from Australia, Japan, and Canada blithely put their Visa and MasterCard down to pay for the hotel room, and they wouldn't take mine. So it was the first time I really felt discriminated against for just being an American. And I took it very personally, but actually it's just a business deal, because they don't have any contracts with the Visa banks or anything like that in the United States. They're prohibited from doing that. There's a story that, I don't want to go over time on this, but there's a story about how I got some money in Korea, which I'd like to tell at the end. Now, in terms of being there, there is no private ownership of cars, and one cannot rent a car for personal use. So nobody owns a car, and you can't get a car while you're there. Travel around the country is always in the company of a staff interpreter who's assigned by the officially designated contact group, which for IPPNW is KANPP, which is the Korean Anti-Nuclear Peace Physicians. And you're pretty much under their wing while you're there. The hotel room costs $100 a night, payable in cash on check-in, at least for me. And passports are collected upon arrival and returned on departure, sometimes before, but not always. This was also true, however, in the former Soviet Union before the break of relations there. So they pretty much got your documents. There is no underground opposition group, and Western newspapers are not available. This is not like in the Soviet Union. There was always an underground samizdat that was periodically getting itself into trouble and was publishing things and handing out flyers and all that sort of thing. There is no opposition in North Korea that anybody knows of. Kim Il-sung, the father of the country and originator of Juche, is revered and loved. He is usually shown with children and animals, birds flying around his head. Juche, which is this right here, roughly translates into self-reliance. And beginning in the 1920s, when he was a young man, he promulgated this theory of Koreans depending only on themselves. And this is still their main philosophy in terms of self-sufficiency and self-reliance. It's gotten them probably as far as they've come in a very, very bad economic situation, because they are tough. They are extremely patriotic. They are single-minded, and they feel like they can take on the world. That obviously has a downside to it, because it leads one to do things militarily that are inappropriate, and it also refuses aid when aid should be coming in. On the plus side, the people are pretty much uniformly nice and appreciative, especially of American visitors. They seem to know it's hard travel for us, and they respect the effort. The rooms are simple but clean, and the visitor is offered food that is more than adequate, especially in light of what ordinary North Koreans have available. There is some obligatory political rhetoric, but much less than one might have expected. And the professionals, doctors, engineers, seem genuinely anxious to learn what we can teach them and freely acknowledge their shortfall of information. I was concerned, as was my wife, as to exactly what kind of plane we'd be flying from Beijing to North Korea, considering the poverty of the country. But one needn't worry. This is an Ilyushin jet that they got from the Soviet Union when it was still the Soviet Union. And all the pilots are military pilots, sort of for obvious reasons. And so they're very competent, and flying is not a problem. This is landing at the Pyongyang airport. This is Kenjiro Yokoro, who's a survivor of the Hiroshima bombing, and his wife, Sachiko, and an interpreter from the Korean side, myself, and a portion of the medications that we brought. This is downtown Pyongyang, as seen from one of their monuments. A little bit of fog in the air. It's not really smog, because there isn't much, if any, real industry there, and there aren't enough cars to create smog. So this was just real fog. But you can see it's a fairly modern-looking, clean city with wide boulevards. You can't just go from the airport to your hotel room. You get taken to the memorials, especially the memorial of Kim Il-sung. This is Marilyn, my wife. And there were some children here who wanted to pose with us in front of the statue of Kim Il-sung. It would be very much like if you had just gotten into Washington, D.C. from here and were met by somebody who said, let's go visit the monuments before you go to the hotel. That's exactly what it's like. They wanted to take the medications from me at the airport. They said, we need to check these, we need to make sure that they're okay, and we will help distribute them. And I said, no, we're not going to do it that way. What we're going to do is we're going to put them in my hotel room, and if you need to have somebody come by to check them, then we'll do it like that. And so what we did was store them in a hotel room for safekeeping. Some of these things are extremely expensive, to the tune of $5 a pill for some of the antibiotics. So they let us do that. That's the good news. The bad news is there are no locks on any of the hotel room doors. I looked at that for a long time. I mean, there's not even a keyhole in the door. So one of the first things we did was we said, let's go to some of the medical centers around, and they arranged for us to do exactly that. I'm an echocardiographer, which is a way of looking at the heart with ultrasound, and lo and behold, they had a nice piece of Japanese equipment, and they had people who knew how to use it. And so here we are talking cardiac echo talk with some North Korean physicians. They also had a very good technologist. She's very perky and kind of opinionated, the way mine are. And I felt very much at home. She was excellent, a very good echo tech. And I even found myself offering her a job if she could come across. But here she's doing a very good transthoracic echo. They showed us, they were very open about showing us the hospitals, and you know, they're kind of proud of them, and they talk in a very proud way of them. But you know, I had the feeling that they had kind of stocked up on babies for our benefit, because the children in the newborn unit were a lot bigger than you usually see. My wife was amazed at this. She said, my God, that child's 3 years old. Now, on the more serious side of things, you notice how dark this is? That's not a problem with my photography. This captures very well how dimly lit everything is. It's because they don't have any electricity. They don't have much. And they also can't run their monitoring equipment for the same reason. They've got monitors, but they're shrouded here for two reasons. One is there aren't enough patients to really justify using them. And number two, they don't have enough electricity to run them. They also, we went to their laboratory where they do CBCs and urinalyses and so forth, and they can't get the reagents. They used to get the reagents from the Soviet Union. They can't get the chemicals needed to do this testing, and even if they could, they don't have enough energy to run the centrifuges and machines. This is in their intensive care unit. This is the main teaching hospital in Pyongyang. And this is pretty much what it looks like, pretty stripped down, and nobody home. There was one patient in the entire ICU, if you can call it an ICU, but this is like a glass water bottle that was being used as a sort of a drainage or IV situation, and you know, a very spare room with no monitoring capability, nothing. I brought over some slides and gave them a series of talks, and that's something for our next trip that we'd like to do more of, rather than simply the goodies or medical aid, because I think one of the real needs over there is to try to keep their physicians current with what's going on, and there's almost no way to do that without directly interacting with them. So we gave them some talks, and one of the talks had to do with gene transfer, which is a way that we're using at St. Elizabeth's to create new blood vessels in the legs and create blood flow where limbs might be in jeopardy of being amputated. So they were very interested, and they had very good questions about that. It's really sad, because you knew that they knew the science, but they just hadn't heard of this stuff. There was an infomercial with every talk that we gave, and that infomercial had to do with what would happen to medical facilities in the event of a nuclear war. This is a picture I've had for many, many years of the Nagasaki Medical University in ruins in October of 1945. And if there's any illusion in anybody's mind about what would happen to the medical care system in the event of a nuclear war, one needs to take a look at this picture. This was the premier Western-style medical center in Japan in 1945, and it was left in absolute ruins. And that's the message we gave the North Koreans. So without too much in the way of traditional medicine, what they've done is they've reverted a lot back to non-traditional things. This is sort of a cupping procedure to relieve pain in the legs, and it's a series of, they're heating, there are little votive candles in here, and they're actually kind of sucking the blood to the surface of the skin and heating it and hoping to relieve pain that way. The patients say they feel great. They say it works. And this is North Korean therapy for leg and back pain. These are sort of needles that are stuck in there like acupuncture needles, but they're not just needles, they're connected to an energy source. It's like a battery here, and they switch it on and off. It's like electrical therapy that gets pulsed into the spine, and the patient told me through an interpreter that it had helped him quite a bit. North Korean children shown here not only have physical retardation, but they have growth retardation as well. This boy, who looks to be, maybe 2 years old, is actually 5 years old in this picture. And this child is 4 and, looks to be much, much younger. And so it's really affected their growth. And they have this, the whole time I was with them, I didn't see any smiling, and it's not because they were afraid of me, because it wasn't that kind of situation. I was told that they never smile, and I think he's retarded from not having the vitamins and nutrition that he should have had. This is another malnourished North Korean child held by a nurse in a pediatric hospital, and you can see how spindly her legs are. She was a little bit more animated, but not much. But not all the kids look bad. Some of them, like these kids who are in a nursery school, are dancing and performing. These are the obligatory pictures of the great leader and the dear leader that are basically in every room in North Korea. They looked all right. I mean, they're skinny, but they don't look malnourished to me. And this is a woman who is the head of one of the hospitals, kind of the chief medical officer, and we actually left, Ken Yukoro brought a whole bunch of stuff from Japan, and this is the stuff from the United States, so we left her with quite a bit. She actually ran a maternity hospital, and they weren't in the habit at all of using prenatal vitamins. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And with what's going on now with folate and spina bifida and all that kind of thing, they just don't have any of that. And those are very inexpensive medications. Again, this is in a maternity hospital in Pyongyang, and I'm explaining to them why they should use prenatal vitamins. I'm not an obstetrician, but I'm telling these guys that. And so we left them with a whole bunch of stuff. This is a clinic in rural North Korea. This is well outside of Pyongyang. And this is about halfway between the border, the DMZ, and Pyongyang. And this is the head of the clinic, who was a very good guy. I've actually met him twice now. I met him on both trips because I insisted on going down to see him. He had excellent questions, and the main problem is they just need medications and vitamins and such. And here I am writing a list. I got writer's cramp because I couldn't keep up with all the stuff he said he needed. This is Marilyn, and this is in a hospital. So what they have, since they don't have drugs, they have ginkgo. They have herbs. And this is herbs that they're drying on the floor in the hospital with a little bit of sunlight. And they gave me a couple of bottles of this stuff, which I haven't tried. But it's like an elixir that's supposed to make you feel good. It's a ginkgo biloba. We use things like this now, but we don't rely on them for serious infections and stuff. This is my very poor attempt to sit cross-legged while eating a Korean meal in Kaesong City. This is a lovely kind of antique town that has beautiful architecture. It's very close to the demilitarized zone. And as we passed it, I was able to take this picture of rice fields, and you'd say, gee, how can there be famine? Because, the crop looks so good. This picture, however, was taken during the second trip, which was in June of the year, and it's kind of planting season. And I was told that what's happened every year before this for the past 5 years was they'd plant all this stuff and then the flood would come and wash it right out. It's just heartbreaking. And it's a main food source. And the flood also overwhelmed the dams. They have these dams that aren't built with very good concrete because they can't get good concrete. And this is like a Grapes of Wrath era tractor. You see this tractor right here, and you don't see anything like that anymore. And that's what they have. And even at that, they build most of their stuff. These are 3 workers trying to build a dam with with just stones, basically. We visited a small village that had been destroyed by mudslides because of the defoliation of the mountaintops, people cutting firewood, to try to keep warm. They denuded the mountaintops up here, and when the rains came in the monsoon season, the flood came down and basically destroyed this whole town. And this was, kind of a middle-class house before that happened. And it left the people to do their laundry and their cleaning in these streams. I don't know. I asked about the pollution of this, but considering that they didn't have indoor plumbing, I'd be very worried about the cleanliness of that. This is our delegation. Ian Maddox is from Australia. The Yokoros from Japan. Mary Wynne Ashford is a leader from Western Canada, Victoria, and Marilyn here. So they were getting this talk, and I was kind of looking around for something interesting to take a photograph, and I saw this boy who clearly wanted his picture taken. And I've actually published this picture since then. This has been published in a couple of places as a North Korean boy smiling, a great little kid, and he just wanted to play. The North Korean gateway to the DMZ, this is how you get into the really bad territory. This is down near Panmunjom. It's in Panmunjom. And you go through here, and it's 2 miles to the South Korean. Well, it's actually 1.25 miles because the DMZ is 2.5 miles in diameter. But you go through this gate to get there. It looks lush. It looks beautiful. It looks like a game preserve. But don't step on the grass. It's the most heavily mined area on Earth. The DMZ, it's the most heavily armed strip of land on Earth. 2.5 miles in diameter and 155 miles in length across the entire Korean peninsula. It's heavily landmined, and the main reason given by the U.S. in its refusal to sign the international treaty banning landmines, and this was under Clinton. Clinton said that we couldn't sign the IBL because we didn't know how to protect the South Koreans from the North Koreans, who it was assumed would come right through there if we didn't have landmines. It's an incredible wildlife refuge with scores of plant and animal species not seen anywhere else on Earth. That's because no people go through it. Ironically, the survival of these species may be threatened if there is more traffic across the DMZ. I happened to meet E.O. Wilson, who's the great naturalist and biologist who's an expert on biodiversity, and also Jane Goodall, who's the wonderful woman with the chimpanzees. And we were talking about this because they were waxing eloquent about this is a wildlife refuge. And I said, yeah, but you know what? If the North and the South solve their problems, you can kiss that goodbye because they'll build roads through it, and that's the end of the species. But, it's ironic, but most of us would rather have the peace part. Well, this is Panmunjom, and this is the border between North and South Korea, and it's sort of seen from the wrong side. This is the north side, and that's the south. That's South Korea. And these huts are where the negotiations took place, and half of the hut is in the South Korea and half is in North Korea, this half closest to us. And this is Marilyn taking a picture of the North Korean guards and the South Korean guards who are taking pictures of her. She later accused me of destroying her security clearance. But one thing, I don't know if you can notice, but these guys look strong and healthy and robust and look like they do jiu-jitsu all the time. And these guys are pretty skinny. And that's been looked at when some of these North Korean soldiers have fled, have defected to the south. Their body weight has been just incredibly poor. This is the north side's here and the south side's here. So Marilyn is half in North Korea and half in South Korea. On the way back from the DMZ and from Panmunjom, we stopped at one of my favorite places in the country because this is a great guy. He's the head of the main pediatric hospital in that area and very open Western-style honesty and was very upright about showing us the good, the bad, and the ugly about his hospital and talking about his needs. And this is again at the pediatric hospital. This is him and our group of people. We also, on the way back from there, heading back towards Pyongyang, visited a nursery school where we saw these kids who also saw us giggling and all that kind of thing, the way kids always are. And this beautiful young girl who was playing on the swings outside. She is within, well, she's certainly within missile distance of the DMZ, and she's only about 25, 30 miles away from it. and definitely in the middle of a war zone that could be an incinerator. These children are performing in a more or less professional way back at the National Palace for Children, and this is what the North Koreans like to show off. They show off these healthy appearing children who are extremely skilled. I don't know if you can see, but they're playing fairly sophisticated instruments here, one playing sort of a tambourine, and these girls have a kind of keyboard type thing, and the performances are very, very professional. I've taken care of a number of Catholic priests and bishops and so forth over the years, and so when I was going to North Korea, I called up one of my bishop friends and said, is there anything that you'd like me to find out about any lingering Catholic church in North Korea? So he said he didn't know. This was Bishop William Murphy, but he said he would find out. So he called the Vatican, and he called me back in a couple of days. He said, actually, what we've heard is that there is a church in Pyongyang that's a Catholic church, and we'd like to know what's going on there. So the first trip I made, I told my minders that I was very interested in finding out if there was a Catholic church, and they kept putting me off. They said, well, the fellow who's in charge of it is off visiting his relatives, and we can't get in touch with him. And I said, well, it must be somebody else. Maybe you could just drive me by it so I could say that I saw it. They said, well, you know, we can't really do that. It wouldn't be the right protocol. And then they found somebody, and they said, well, he's not sufficiently high in the hierarchy to be talking to somebody from the United States. I said, look, I'm not negotiating a peace treaty. I just want to see the church. And so they put me off, and you're only there for 4 days, so it didn't work out. And at the airport, they said, how did you like the trip? I said, it was good, but you know, I'm really disappointed about one thing. I would have thought that there would have been a greater degree of openness about that Catholic church. And they said, well, the next time you come, we'll show it to you, fully believing that nobody ever goes back there. But lo and behold, 18 months later, I'm back. And I said, now how about the Catholic Church? So on the third day that I was there, they brought me to the Catholic Church. And we met these fellows, all of whom have taken Christian names. He's taken the name of Paul. This is Peter. And I think this is James. They've all taken biblical or Catholic names. And they have this wonderful church that was actually built with money from the Vatican. And it is maintained by the government. And they have services at 4 o'clock every Sunday afternoon, I am told. And if there's a priest, there are no priests in the country. But if a priest is visiting, coming in from China or from Rome, he's welcome to say Mass for the Catholic population. And pretty much, I asked these fellows, well, how, you know, this is obviously an atheist country, so how do they let you guys survive? And they said, well, you know, we agree with the government's social policies, and, you know, we don't interfere with them, and they like us because we do good charity work. So I asked them, you know, what the Vatican could do for them, because I thought I'd have to tell my bishop that. And they said, well, you know, actually, we could use some ambulances. So I did transfer the information to Bishop Murphy, and I don't know what happened after that. But basically, I think some money will be going, has gone from the Vatican to these folks. This statement I read in a book by George Kennan, who many of you may know about. He was a great diplomat who's now in his late 90s, still alive, and a wonderful writer as well as a diplomat. But in his later years, he's come out very strongly against nuclear weapons. But at any rate, he quotes Bertrand Russell as saying something that's always appealed to me, and that is, we appeal, oops, now I do have to have you go back. We appeal as human beings to human beings. You want to go the other way? The arrow on top, that's it. That's it. We appeal as human beings to human beings. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. This is a statement that was drafted by Bertrand Russell as an appeal against the development of nuclear weapons, and it was the last statement signed by Albert Einstein in the final week of his life. But I think it's a wonderful statement that has a lot of controversy to it, but I think that means a lot. Well, what's the hope for the future? We're going to be having our next World Congress in Beijing in September of this year, and we hope to lead a delegation of doctors back into North Korea. The climate has changed a lot since 4 years ago when I had my last trip there, and it's very difficult. I've been working on this for 6 months now, and it's very, very difficult to pin them down. You have to have an invitation to get into the country, and that's the hang-up. they pretty much can stop it right at that level. But we're very hopeful of getting back in there. The main thrust of future exchanges will be medical education and perhaps direct medical and surgical work, as with Project PACER and Rotary International. Project PACER is a group that a good friend of mine, Tom Piemonte, who's the chief of the cath lab at Leahy Clinic, is very much involved in, and they go into developing countries and they do cardiac catheterizations and procedures, angioplasties and valvuloplasties and pacemakers for free. And as you know, Rotary International, of which we have some members here, including myself, Winchester Rotary, is very active and interventional in developing countries with providing health care and things like correction of cleft palate and blindness. We have to get the North Korean doctors on the internet, at least for medical informatics. The Chinese, the way this happened in China was they had very restricted use of the internet, and then the whole thing opened up. If you go to Beijing now, there are internet cafes all over the place. Most of them are in places like Starbucks. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Now, the North Koreans are afraid of that for just that reason, because once they get the internet, then it's very hard to keep the cat in the bag. And you know, there's got to be some diplomatic way to soften the blow of that. But unless their doctors get on the internet, there's really no hope for the patients. And what we would like to do is to train bright young North Korean physicians in specialty medicine in the United States and or Canada. We have hosted a group of young cardiologists from Pyongyang, from the Red Cross Hospital here, at my hospital, St. Elizabeth's, and at the Mass General. Richard Libertson, who's the head of their congenital heart disease in the adult program, is married to a South Korean woman, a woman of South Korean extraction. And we actually had a dinner together. She had never met a North Korean. So I brought 6 of these North Korean doctors one night to dinner to her, and they had a great time just talking about everything. And there was actually one of these fellows who was very young, very bright, spent the whole day in our electrophysiology laboratory at St. E's. And I tried very hard to get him a fellowship at St. Elizabeth's. But the world's probably just not ready for that yet, but we're working on it. I just want to leave you with a couple of websites for more information or to help support the effort. The first of these is the website of IPPNW. They're pretty easy to remember because it's just the initials and org.org. And Physicians for Social Responsibility, which is psr.org. Or you can just call me here in Winchester. I think it's very important to not do this kind of thing all the time, and we all have to try very hard not to burn out on issues like this. This is a tough kind of thing to work on, and I just want to acknowledge some of the people, animals, and places that have provided me with sanctuary. This is Marilyn. This is the place that she runs up in Vermont, the Inn at Mountain View Farm. And I've started an animal sanctuary up there, and this is Emmy, who's a donkey that we rescued. So thanks to them, and thank you very much, too.